I want to welcome you to the second debate in the second year of this series on significant and provocative public. And I want to thank all of you, first of all, for showing your support of this effort by attending. Again, as we have been in the past, we're very pleased that we generated the interest that we did. I also want to give a special shout out to the folks who are watching us on our Ustream channel, in particular the Maxwell Alumni Network, those folks watching us through EcoWatch in Ohio, and groups in the Finger Lakes and Elmira. The question before you tonight is whether hydrofracking does more harm than good. It's a simple enough question, but it gets very complicated very fast. I'm Grant Reher. I'm the director of the Campbell Public Affairs Institute, and that is the organization that sponsors the debate series. Now, I'll tell you that we chose this question for a debate some time ago, and I will confess to you that I worried just a little bit that perhaps the state would make it somewhat moot during the interim, but fortunately, New York did not let me down. And this is an issue that has divided some of our communities quite deeply. It's even created small-scale civil wars. It has divided different regions of the state and other parts of the nation where hydrofracking is already well established. There are regrets and protests as well as grateful supporters. And we can't possibly sort all that out tonight, but we'll try to provide some insight. Before I very briefly go over some of the ground rules, I want to thank some people. First, I want to thank the four panelists who you'll meet in a minute who have agreed to debate and who have donated their time here tonight as well as their preparation time in order to do this. And I will say, editorially, given the experience in our candidate debate earlier this fall, I'll also say that I'm particularly gratified that they all showed up tonight. I won't introduce them as you have their bios. I'll simply identify them. In favor of the proposition, we have, in the order in which they will speak, Robert Howarth and Paul Gallet. Against the proposition, we have Ed Hinchy and Tim Whitesell. I also want to thank Kelly Coleman, Bethany Wallowender, John Fornoff, and Stephanie Lee of the Campbell Institute, who have worked very hard to put this event together, and also the group of Maxwell graduate student volunteers that they recruited to help with this evening. Now, let me very briefly go over the ground rules and the expectations, particularly for what you can do to help make this debate a success. Your participation is essential here. The more specific ground rules are contained in the handouts and the brochure that you received when you entered. First, please silence your cell phones. If any of you in the audience is tweeting the debate, please use the following hashtag, Campbell Debates. We have four panelists who are going to debate the proposition. The speakers will alternate between each side, and they'll each have about 7 minutes initially to speak. Then they'll have a longer opportunity as teams to further rebut and question what the other side has said. After that, we open it up to you. You'll be able to pose questions or make points directed to one of the other teams. Once you're recognized by raising your hand, we have microphones that will be passed to you, and we ask for two things. First, that you wait for the microphone, as we want to have your comments be part of the archive program and available for the later radio broadcast. And second, that you are brief and to the point, under a minute, please. I'm sure there will be many of you who want to speak, and we do have limited time. Members of the teams may wish to respond to what you have to say or your questions, and again, they'll do that very briefly. Then at the very end, each team will have a very brief chance to make a closing argument, and after that, you will render your decision, and I'll say more about how you'll do that at the end of the debate. In the reception that follows outside, you'll have a chance to meet the debaters and to continue the conversation. I have one final important request of all of you. Some of you are here because you are wrestling with this question or because you want to learn more. At least I hope some of you are here for that. Others are here to root for a team, and that's fine too. We just ask for mutual respect and civility, and I think given the nature of the question and some of the emotions that it attracts and generates, I want to repeat that, mutual respect and civility. And I think that covers it. So now, if you would please welcome the panelists, and we will turn it over to them. is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Grant. Thank you all for coming tonight. Let me speak directly to the question at the start. High-volume hydraulic fracturing causes far more harm than good to people and to the environment. It's a dangerous and still developing experiment. So let me begin by briefly explaining what hydraulic fracturing is. Hydraulic fracturing is not new. It's been going on for decades as a way to stimulate traditional oil and gas wells using small volumes of water. What's new is using high-volume hydraulic fracturing combined with high-precision directional drilling to get at things like shale gas. That is new. It's very new. In doing it, we're using 50 to 100 times more water and chemical additives than used in the traditional fracking. It's a very different phenomenon. The combination of using these new technologies to open up shale is something that's really only developed over the last decade, pretty much. And half of all of the shale gas that's ever been developed in the world has been developed within the last 3 years. So it's a new technology. Now that means that the science of understanding what the consequences of it to the environment and to public health is also quite new. And to put that in context, as of today, there are around 30 peer-reviewed papers on public health and environmental effects of shale gas. But as of 20 months ago, there were none. So all of the science that's come out has come out in the last 19 months, since April of 2011. And as with any science, it's developing quickly. There's a lot of disagreement and controversy. But there's also a strong and growing body of research papers which should give any reasonable person pause. I believe in the precautionary principle, and there are plenty of things about shale gas to be worried about. Let me describe my own research, which is on the greenhouse gas footprint of shale gas. We did the first comprehensive analysis of the greenhouse gas footprint of shale gas, including methane, not just carbon dioxide. And our conclusion was that shale gas is worse than any other fossil fuel in terms of its consequences on global change. Now, global change is real, and it's providing a tremendous and increasingly present threat to society. The planet is already 0.8 of a degree Celsius above the long-term mean of a century ago. At the current rate of warming, we'll be 1.5 degrees warmer in 18 years from now, and 2 degrees warmer in 35 to 40 years from now, according both to NASA and the United Nations, unless we make some pretty major changes in energy policy and consumption. Now, at that level of warming, we run a very real risk of hitting a tipping point in the climate system and changing the Earth into something that's drastically different from what any of us have ever experienced. So that time period, those temperature changes, the time period of 18 to 40 years from now is critical. And the only way to prevent that from happening is to begin immediately to reduce methane emissions. Dealing with carbon dioxide emissions alone is not enough, according both to NASA and the United Nations, and that's because the climate system behaves much more quickly, responds more quickly to methane than to carbon dioxide. There are long lags in the carbon dioxide footprint. We need to address carbon dioxide, but it's more urgent that we cut methane emissions. If we do not do so, we are in a lot of trouble. Natural gas is mostly methane, and today in the United States, the natural gas industry is the single largest source of methane pollution. Our research and data from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency say that shale gas will increase that methane pollution from natural gas by somewhere between 40 to 60%, and we cannot afford that in this critical time period. There are other issues with environment and shale gas, and I'll just mention some quickly. Water pollution. There are a lot of chemical additives that are used in hydraulic fracturing. As importantly, the frac fluids extract stuff from shale. They extract radioactive substances like thorium and uranium and radium. They extract aromatic hydrocarbons that are toxic and carcinogenic. They extract toxic metals. Some of these materials are released to the environment in the occasional accident on the surface or the occasional blowouts, and yes, blowouts do happen in shale gas wells. But the greater route of exposure comes from what you do when you dispose of the frac fluid returns that come back to the surface. And after a well is hydraulically fractured, in the first few weeks, somewhere around 20% of the fluid, 1 million gallons or so per well, comes back to the surface with all of the, well, in Texas, which is where most shale gas has been developed so far, they deep inject it into old abandoned conventional gas and oil wells, and that's not a bad thing to do with it. Here in the Northeast, we don't have an adequate supply of such wells. There's some in Ohio, some of the waste from Pennsylvania was going there until it started causing earthquakes, and so that's been shut down. If you look at where most of the material has gone, it goes into municipal wastewater treatment plants, which is a bad idea. I want to talk about local air pollution because together with methane going to the atmosphere, these wells release things like benzene. And in Texas, the state data show sometimes near toxic levels of benzene in the atmosphere in drilling areas. In Pennsylvania, the concentrations are lower, but they're high enough to pose a significant cancer risk already in Pennsylvania. Ozone is a big issue. We get more ozone from shale gas because the methane reacts with sunlight and nitrogen. And there are already 30,000 premature deaths in the U.S. each year from ozone, as many as from car accidents. And we're seeing unprecedented levels of ozone in the American West from shale gas development, higher levels in Utah and Colorado than in New York City much of the time now. Finally, let me mention radon as an issue, because natural gas contains a little bit of radon, traditionally. Shale gas has a huge amount more radon. And that means that if you cook with natural gas in your kitchen, you are pumping radon into your kitchen. 20,000 people a year are already dying from cancer from radon exposure in the United States. Shale gas will aggravate that. Now finally, let me just say that shale gas is another example of extreme energy technology. We're depleting the conventional fossil fuels of the world, and we are left with the extreme events like mountaintop removal of coal, tar sands in Alberta for oil, deep sea offshore oil, such as resulted in the BP oil spill 2 years ago, and shale gas. All of these have larger environmental consequences than the traditional fossil fuels we needed, and I think it's time that we recognize we're in the 21st century. We need to kick our century addiction to fossil fuels, move ahead into a renewable future. The technology is there. We can talk more about that in questions because I'm told my time is up and I'm done. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. The Assembly here and Ohio and whoever is streaming, welcome. If you thought that scared you, wait till you hear my arguments. Hydraulic fracturing and unconventional gas development does more good than harm. It's simple. It's a hands-down no-brainer. 1.2 million children die in the world every year from pneumonia. It's the leading cause of death for children under the age of 5. It mostly happens in the developed world, and it's mostly caused by breathing smoky fires in their huts, fueled by grass, straw, and wood. They're dying from the exposure to the particles that are in that wood and that are in that grass. Tonight, I'm going to ask you to think about big picture harms, not about 30 peer-reviewed articles that think that there might be a problem, not wild claims that there are chemicals present that are going to hurt you, but real statistics about people that are dying now from our burning of fossil fuel coal. Gas can replace coal, not all of the coal. And when coal technology catches up and they start burning their coal in a clean process, we'll burn more coal. I don't want you to think in terms of potentials and threats, but I want you to think in terms of real harm, the harm that is happening today. All decisions require risk. Our challenge is to make the wiser. In our world, we don't see the tragedy of biomass deaths that we see in the developing world, up close and personal. But we live with coal combusted in old-fashioned boilers. The United States gets a little under 50% of its current electricity from the combustion of coal. Of the approximately 4 trillion kilowatt hours we use in a year, 2 trillion kilowatt hours comes from coal. The price of coal is not tallied at the cash register, it's tallied at the hospital. According to the Clean Air Task Force and the American Lung Association, these are real numbers. Soot from coal combustion results in 13,000 to 30,000 premature deaths per year. 250,000 asthma attacks, of which 10,000 will land somebody into the hospital for a hospitalization. And there will be 20,000 heart attacks caused by the contaminants that are on those finest particles on the PM 2.5, because coal releases so much PM 2.5. That's just the health effect from the contaminants that you see. You can see them coming out of the coal stack. They also release 96,000 pounds of mercury, 176,000 pounds of lead, 161,000 pounds of chromium, 100,000 pounds of arsenic. And they generate 1.3 trillion tons of solid waste. That's 3 times greater than the entire municipal load of the nation, just to generate coal, to create coal. Methane releases half the CO2 as coal. So if we went from coal to methane, we would release half as much CO2, the principal greenhouse gas pollutant. We would release no mercury, no arsenic, no chromium, no lead. Natural gas is pure methane. 1 carbon, 4 hydrogen. When you burn it, you make CO2 and water, and none of the junk. No soot, no metals. To quote James Hansen, if you've heard of him, the head of Goddard, in a recent letter he sent to President Obama, he said, "Coal plants are factories of death." Robert Kennedy called for the end of dependence on deadly and destructive coal. We need to diversify our energy portfolio. We need to get the coal industry to become more efficient and clean. And in the meantime, we need to move to methane, to natural gas. I support renewable energy development. Today, after a lot of work, we now get 10% of our primary energy from renewables. The odd thing is that 50 years ago, we got 10% of our primary energy from renewables. Our renewable capacity is expanding, but it's not keeping up with demand. For every kilowatt hour of renewable energy we have, we need 1 kilowatt hour of backup power, because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and we don't have the batteries we need to store all that energy. I would prefer quick cycling methane burning gas turbines to coal. You can't turn a coal plant off. You can cycle a gas plant up and down quickly. The U.S. has installed over 100,000 hydraulically fractured wells since 1996 without incident for an undertaking of this scale. There have been accidents. Any project this large will have accidents. Regulatory and scientific agencies all over the world have studied hydraulic fracturing, and studies are going on. And universally, they have found there is no systemic problem with hydraulic fracturing. Universally, they have found that hydraulic fracturing can be conducted safely. It must be regulated, it must be watched, but it can be done safely. Our own New York State DEC just completed a 5-year expansive environmental impact analysis, which they were prepared to release. Today it was postponed for another 90 days for another medical review, which I support the governor in that decision. And they've also released a set of regulatory guidelines. The DEC has made the conclusion that we can do it safely. They've laid out the plan to do it, and they've laid out the regulations to do it safely. Ladies and gentlemen, hydraulic fracturing and its ability to replace dirty coal is the wiser choice, and it does more good than harm. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Hydrofracking does more harm than good. It damages the environment. It has a serious negative impact on public health. It uses precious resources unsustainably. It prolongs and deepens our dependence on fossil fuels and retards our efforts to move to sustainable energy. It changes communities, and not for the better. It distributes its limited benefits unequally, and the benefits are to the very few, and the impacts, the negative impacts, are to the many. It is poorly regulated, and I say this as a man who spent 13 years in public service regulating on environmental issues. It is simply an uncontrolled and unsuccessful experiment to the detriment of public health. I'm going to circle back to each of those points. My colleague, Dr. Howarth, has discussed damage to the environment. I want to go right to the health question. Did you know that before hydrofracking in Texas, in the Fort Worth area, there was roughly half the ozone-related chemicals that there are now, that there's been a 60% increase in ozone pollution, and there's more ozone pollution from fracking than from all cars, trucks, buses, and other mobile sources in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Did you know that in Wyoming, the federal government found that you have smog levels higher than Los Angeles? You have benzene levels well above acceptable limits. Did you know that the Colorado School of Public Health found that if you're within 3,000 feet of a fracking operation, you have a 66% increase in your risk for certain cancers? And did you know that the Duke University found that if your drinking water supply is within 3,000 feet of a fracking pad, you're going to have 17 times more methane in your drinking water than if you were farther than 3,000 feet away. And this is not methane that was there before. That's one of the lies that the industry tells you. This is methane that is fingerprinted as consistent with the methane you find 4,000 feet down where they do the fracking operations. Fracking is not safe. Coal kills, but you want to trade one ill for another, move to fracking. Look at issues with the issue of fossil fuel dependency. Fracking is so inexpensive relative to the damage that it does. The cost of fracked gas has decreased. It's roughly $3.60 for a million BTUs at this point. It was up as high as $7 or $8. There's a glut of it on the market because of all the fracking. And because of all the fracking, the prices dropped so low that the companies cannot afford to do it with anything like the sort of responsibility that you would want from people developing a source of fuel that is so new and has so many risks. Fracking uses roughly 4 million to 8 million gallons of water per well, 4,000 truck trips per well. And in so doing, most of that water stays down there. It's lost to the hydrological cycle. You know that we had a drought in 62% of this country, a significant drought this year. What's the only thing that's worse than losing that 66 billion gallons of fracked water that has been used on the 26,000 fracked wells over the last 2 years? The water that comes back up. It's got toxics. It's got radiological materials. New York has no means of treating it. They inject it into wells, and in 5 states in this country, those injection wells have caused earthquakes in Europe as well. If you look at a couple of very specific developments on fracking, you'll understand that those who have a chance to frack close to home, like Mayor Bloomberg, he could have fracked in the New York City watershed. He waited till the New York City watershed was exempted from fracking, and then he said, fracking looks pretty good to me. By the way, Syracuse water also exempted from fracking. The changes to community character are real, significant, and not for the best. The cost to local roads is as much as $375 million a year. That's an unfunded mandate. Perhaps that's why roughly 150 different units of government in New York have decided that they don't want fracking within their borders, and there have been court cases saying that you have the power through zoning to ban or have a moratorium on fracking while you consider these issues. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, an organization I was proud to work for 10 years, had a review of the social and economic impacts of fracking. It was 256 pages long. 250 of those pages extolled the benefits of fracking, and 6 of them, in the most cursory terms imaginable, dismissed any potential negative impact. No discussion of impact on farming. One sentence about tourism. We've had wells in New York for years. We've got tourism, so we'll continue to have tourism if we have new wells. Well, honestly, these are wells that use 4,000 truck trips. These are wells that use 8,000 gallons of water. There are studies that say, from the southern tier, that once the benefits of fracking are gone, we're going to be left with an industrialized landscape that people are not going to want to visit. The crowding, the changes in the character of the community, these are very significant. You've got environmental issues, public health issues. It changes the community, and for what? For an uncontrolled experiment that will give us some new sources of fuel that will exacerbate serious issues with climate change because of methane, that will prevent you from being able to have access to renewable fuels, because those renewable fuels will not be cost competitive because fracking does not take into account all of its costs. You want to do a good thing for the climate, you want to do a good thing for the community. Did you know that you can reduce your energy use on average by about 30%? It's being done all over the country. It's being done from Maine to Hawaii, and it can be done in a cost-effective manner. And if we do the wise things that we ought to with regard to energy efficiency, renewables, repowering old inefficient plants so that they are more efficient, we do not need a single additional cubic foot of natural gas to maintain our quality of life, and we will be better for it. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm coming to you with a little bit of a different twist. I am a resident and landowner from the town of Binghamton. I'm also the supervisor for the past 22 years for the town of Binghamton. I've become an active member of the New York State Association of Towns, where I currently serve as its president. This issue is become a contentious and divided issue amongst municipalities throughout New York State. That's why the New York State Association of Towns has taken a position of neutrality in this position, to this issue. I'm here to say that I support the safe drilling of natural gas. My perspectives, again, come as a local elected official in a town where a majority of the residents anxiously await the release of the SGIS from the DEC. We're anticipating the same economic opportunity benefits that are being enjoyed across the border in the state of Pennsylvania, which is literally right there. And we see the benefits being realized from the state of Pennsylvania. I've always said that town government is the closest form of government to the people. And I've always likened it to it's where the tire hits the pavement. It's where our kids play. It's where we run into the grocery store and see everyone, where a quick trip to the store takes a half an hour to an hour because somebody needs to talk to you. We as local elected officials need to take the position which is in the best interest of a majority of our residents. That's why we've seen nearly 150 bans and moratorias across the state and the central New York area. However, it must be stated that the moratorias and bans in these locations are not reflective of the viewpoints of the residents of the southern tier in respect to this issue, because the drilling is not going to be taking place in the southern tier. An overwhelming majority of the municipalities in the southern tier are promoting the drilling and just waiting for the industry to come. Tonight's discussion will be presented in two very different perspectives, as you've heard. Our side of the panel is promoting the side of the issue that has provided factual evidence on the benefits associated with the drilling of natural gas. Landowners saving their family farms, property, economic stimulus, job creation, a reduction in taxes within community through both property and school taxes, better infrastructure and better air quality, These benefits are attributed to the shale gas development. The facts, again, travel across the border into the Susquehanna and Bradford County and witness a farmer's rejuvenation of their farms as they're purchasing new equipment or rebuilding their farms, their barns, their homes in the region. Local stores where they're having a difficult time maintaining the inventory in order to compensate for the outreach businesses now associated with the natural gas companies. Businesses such as U.S. Steel, who is now turning out pipes and natural gas rigging for natural gas riggings, pipelines, and wells, and utilizing 100 billion cubic feet of natural gas last year, and allowing them to realize a $100 million savings to their company, and while creating jobs. Local trucking companies in Susquehanna County hiring 4 times the staff that they had 2 years ago. Windsor, New York, a town next to ours in Broome County, has a natural gas compressor and a laser pipeline that brings gas from Pennsylvania. The compression station has a $24 million assessment. The residents in Windsor recently saw a reduction of 5% in their school tax bill when their budget went up still. Again, when was the last time any of us have seen that happen in our school taxes? Reports of local governments with the expectation of the production of drilling realizing $36,000 in tax revenue from a single well over a 5-year time period. Investments over $18 million to improve and maintain efficient transportation on county roads in Susquehanna County alone. Community outreach efforts that have helped benefit funding from the Endless Mountain Health System Match Fund program of $1.2 million to the community. The production of Marcellus gas is exceeding the expectation in Pennsylvania and creating 240,000 jobs. All jobs related to the natural and gas activities. The projected economic benefit in New York, you're looking at $11.4 million. New York City Mayor Bloomberg believes that natural gas is crucial for the environment and help clean New York City's air. He donated $6 million to the Environmental Defense Fund because EDF believes natural gas is crucial for our future. Natural gas is a cleaner and cheaper source of energy, and with the new regulations placed for reduced emissions completion from the EPA by 2015, we will realize the proposed reduction of 95% of the VOCs. During the presidential election, we saw President Obama and Mitt Romney agree that our country needs to pursue natural gas. Over 40 towns across upstate New York have signed resolutions confirming that we believe the state and our officials in D.C. have the appropriate expertise to develop a comprehensive statewide plan that will address resource development to local community impacts. The facts are in front of us. We have solid evidence from our neighbors in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado, Louisiana, West Virginia, that this industry is tried and proven. We believe the DEC will provide the most stringent requirements that will hold this industry to the highest standards of environmental protection for our properties. The United States was built on a can-do attitude. These days we hear a lot of voices of those who a can't-do philosophy. We can't do gas, we can't do wind, we can't do power lines, we can't do pipelines. We can do this for the good of our communities, our state, and our nation. Thank you.
Okay, so now we've heard the initial speeches. We'll move into the rebuttal period and follow up, and we will start with the affirmative side, have 10 minutes, and then we'll move to the negative side, and they will have 10 minutes. So I'll leave it to the team.
Thank you. Can you give me like a 4-minute timing if I'm still talking? Give me 4, so that I make sure he has time. I want to touch on a few topics again and amplify a few things that I went over too quickly and just briefly respond. I don't believe the choice is between coal and natural gas. We are running out of conventional fossil fuels that are easy to get, and as I said, we are moving towards extreme energy extraction. Mountaintop removal of coal is bad. Using coal as we're using it is bad. I think there are a lot of problems with deep ocean extraction of oil. I've worked extensively on oil pollution, and I see a lot of problems with that. I think shale gas is bad, shale oil is bad. I think the tar sands of Canada are bad, and we have an alternative. Mark Jacobson of Stanford has written extensively that the United States has the existing technology to become free of fossil fuels within 20 years if we had the political leadership. We can do so at a reasonable cost. How do we do that? Well, the real key is much greater efficiency. We can certainly use energy more efficiently, and we can use gas more efficiently. The number one use of natural gas in New York State, and the number one use of natural gas in the United States, and the number one use of natural gas globally is for heating. It's for space heating, it's for hot water heating. Electricity makes up about 30% in the United States and something like 8% globally. So think heating, and think of how much we could do if we were to weatherize the homes and businesses of the state, make them tight, and use appropriate technology to heat them. The modern technology of heat pumps is incredible. So if we were to take your domestic gas hot water heaters and throw them out and replace them with high-efficiency modern heat pumps, and we weatherize our homes, people are creating jobs, we get energy security, we get economic return on it, and we don't need natural gas. We can, in 5 years, cut natural gas use in this state by half simply by doing that, and we should. I also wanted to mention the water pollution issue. I went over that a little quickly. The Duke study that came out in May of 2001 shows a very high propensity for high methane levels in drinking water wells if you're within 7/10 or so of a mile, as my colleague said. Why that's happening and why some wells show with fracking fluid, most of them don't, but some do, why that's occurring is still very much open to a scientific debate. The Environmental Protection Agency has a long study going on. They'll release it in 2014. I don't know what they'll say. But I do know that there's a growing consensus among the engineers and scientists I talk to that the problem is with poor cementing jobs in the wells. And my colleague Tony Ingraffia, who's a civil engineer who has spent his life working on the fracking technology, pulled together data from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection for last year. And those data show that 6% of the wells in Pennsylvania, regulated state, last year had significant cement failures in the first 6 months. And they become more later on. So maybe industry can do better. Maybe not. There are fundamental reasons, Tony thinks, that we cannot do terribly much better than that. And again, he has spent his life working on designing fracking procedures and cementing procedures. So there are fundamental flaws in this technology. Pollution will occur. The air pollution issues are severe. The ozone concentrations in Wyoming and Utah and Colorado are amazingly high. This is new. 5 years ago, they didn't have the high levels of ozone they do now. The benzene in the air in the Fort Worth area is a significant public health threat. The benzene in the air in Pennsylvania from the operations there is a significant public health threat. So the dangers, the problems are real. There's a lot more we should be doing to get a handle on what those are. Maybe it can be done better. Maybe it can eventually be done well enough. I'm doubtful myself. But we don't have to go down this route of extreme energy in our addiction to fossil fuels. We have an alternative.
Mr. Weitzel made some references I want to take issue with, not surprisingly. He mentioned Bradford County, Pennsylvania. I want to bring some voices into the room with me right now. The first voice I want to bring in is Edward Liroff, who is actually a pro-fracking consultant. And he said, you know, when you look at the money made in Bradford County, it went to 1% of the population. Where did I hear this, we are the 1% or we are the 99% before? I don't think they meant, you know, fracking, but I think it applies here too. Mr. Weitzel also mentioned Environmental Defense Fund. Here's another voice for you. And this man is a fracker. This is not me talking. This is Mark Bowling from Southwestern Energy. He was asked at a conference where Mr. Learoff and myself and he were all speaking, well, how is that effort going to draft these model regulations, to have a meeting of the minds between the companies and the Environmental Defense Fund? And he said, well, I wish it were going better. Most of my colleagues are telling me if we could only debunk this environmental nonsense, then we wouldn't have to worry about this. And there's regulations for disclosure in Texas, and the Wall Street Bloomberg News today announced that these disclosure regulations for the chemicals, that there have been 19,000 requests for exemptions from those disclosure requirements, and that 1 in 7 chemicals in this fracking mix has been exempted. 1 in 7, 19,000 requests. Even my board members who are pro-fracking are disturbed by this, and you should be too. Another man who used the term environmental nonsense, Aubrey McClendon, who has been the head of Chesapeake Energy. I was in a debate with him, and I said that it seems to me that the industry tends to demonize and deny. And what was the very next thing that he did, according to the Wall Street Journal that wrote up the story? The next thing Mr. McClendon proceeded to do was to demonize Mr. Galley and deny all the issues that he had raised. Let's bring a younger voice in, Olivia Cusimano, 6 years old, from Erie, Colorado. She's one of the children who go to school in the hundreds of schools that are located within 2,000 feet of a fracking operation. And did you know that the Pennsylvania state government just enacted a law that will enable frackers to frack on state university lands? State university lands? How does that sound to you guys? DEC, Mr. Whitesell mentioned DEC. When I worked for DEC in the 90s, there were 4,300 people for 17 million and change, 4,300 employees for 17 million New Yorkers. Now there are 2,900 employees for over 18 million New Yorkers, and I'll tell you, they don't have money for gasoline for their boats, they don't have money to pay for sampling, for their water quality tests. It is a shell, it is a hollowed out shell of the agency that I loved. And if you think that the DEC is in a position to regulate hydrofracking, I'm sorry, I have another set of facts you've got to get familiar with. Can do? I'll tell you what can do should mean in this country. I am tired of people saying we have just got to default down to more fossil fuels because we can't do wind, we can't do solar, we can't do energy efficiency. They're the ones who we can't do. Did you know that 95% of the HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment that goes into energy efficiency, the windows as well, 95% of it is made in the United States? You want to benefit the 100% of the people in Bradford County or in the counties here in New York, you have them build HVAC and windows, and you solve our problems with energy through energy efficiency. You know, there was a whole story Tom Brokaw told about the greatest generation. We can be the greatest generation part 2. We just have to have a little more of a sense for real values and where they lie. I have one last voice for you, and this is always my favorite, and I use this every time I make a talk about hydrofracking. This is a woman named Kelly Gant from Bartonsville, Texas, who was written up in the papers. And do you think these people tell these stories because they like to be in the papers? Do you think they move out of their houses because they like having to live in a trailer and put their $9,000 from their fracking checks into trailers or into copays for doctors? You think they like being told by their pediatrician, do not take your son back to your house. You get him straight to your cousins. That's Stacy Haney from Amwell Township, Pennsylvania. And Kelly Gant, I am not an activist, an alarmist, a Democrat, an environmentalist, or anything like that. I'm just a person who isn't able to manage the health of my family because of all this drilling. Thank you.
We heard the voice of 6 people. Over 100,000 wells have been drilled in this country. You heard the voice of...
I only had 5 minutes.
You heard the voice of 6 people. If there was a systemic problem, if everybody was moving into a trailer, If it was a Katrina-sized disaster, somebody would be going down over this. 100,000 wells. These are 6,000 feet deep, 8,000 feet long. They have 30,000 horsepower at the wellhead when they're drilling them. And there are occasional incidences. And you'll hear about them. I'll tell you a story. I went down to Washington County, this is 5 years ago when I just got into this business. And before I went down, I heard on the news of somebody had rabies down in Washington County. And I went into a diner when I was down there, and I was sitting there eating and drinking my coffee, and I heard over the back of my shoulder, geez, did you hear about the outbreak of rabies? And I had heard about it before I went down there. I have an iPad, so I went right for the Center of Disease Control and looked up the rabies outbreak in Washington County. There was one case of rabies, one case. And there's something about human nature. When one case of rabies breaks out, there's an alarm that goes out. And what you're hearing tonight is an alarm. There may be elevated benzene in Fort Worth area. Absolutely. I don't know. I haven't studied Fort Worth. But we didn't hear what context it was there. We didn't hear when it was there. We didn't hear that there was a direct correlation to drilling, only a timing correlation. In Wyoming, there wasn't ozone there 5 years ago. There's ozone there now. We don't know what's going on in Wyoming. What else is happening in Wyoming? You're hearing a lot of scare and not a lot of fact. I'll give you some facts. You heard that Ohio shut down its underground injection program because of an earthquake near Youngstown, Ohio. Ohio did not shut down its underground injection program. It's running very well. 3 wells were shut down near Youngstown, Ohio because there was an earthquake. The State Geological Department is currently evaluating what caused that earthquake and whether they can reopen those wells. The other wells in the state are still running. You heard that there was this Duke study, Steve Osborne, who found that if you're closer, the closer you are to a well, the more methane you have in your well. You also heard that that gas has been fingerprinted, and it's from the formation. Steve Osborne went out to investigate wells that were suspected of being contaminated. It wasn't a random data set. That study has been challenged up and down in the peer-reviewed literature ever since it came out. There are new studies going on right now to try to validate that. I'm not saying he's wrong, but I'm saying it's premature to say that that actually happened, okay? If you take anything away from tonight's debate, take away that this is a rational argument. We should all be thinking about what you hear, the context that it's presented, and sort it out for yourself. You hear millions of gallons of water being used without any context for that. How many people here know how much water the city of New York uses in a day? How much? 1 billion gallons. How much do they lose to leakage in the Delaware Viaduct? 32 million gallons per day, roughly about eight wells that you could hydrofrack. The city of New York loses in its water pipes, okay? How much water does Chobani use? We love Chobani. Everybody loves Chobani, right? I love Chobani. And I'm not saying anything bad about Chobani. They're permitted to do this, and more power to them. I want to keep eating their yogurt. They're permitted to extract 1.2 million gallons of water per day. Now, when you frack a well, you use between 4 and 5 million gallons of water. And you frack, that's for the whole process, and it's over in a month. You hear, I'm not going to live next to fracking. The drillers come in, they hydrofrack the well, and then they're gone. It's seeded, and there's pipes there, okay? Chobani withdraws 1.2 million gallons of water a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I'll check my notes so that I do the math right. That's the equivalent of 100 to 115 hydrofracked wells per year. So it is a lot of water when you hear millions of gallons used for hydraulic fracturing. But in the context of water use in the Susquehanna Basin, it's typical for an industrial operation. Now, you also heard that gas was as high as $7 a million BTUs, or 1,000 cubic feet. It was actually as high as $10 about 7 or 8 years ago, because hydraulic fracturing hadn't started. And I don't know how many people in this room, but I was ready to go hang somebody over at National Grid. My heating bills tripled. Last year in February, it was $2.38 per million BTUs. The government, the GOA, calculated it with John Hanger's help, the former DEP Secretary of Pennsylvania. The average saving to the homeowner in the United States was $1,500 in heating bills. New York State alone saw about a $6 to $8 billion stimulus from money that did not go to pay for heating. That money went into our local economy. Now, regarding a change of character of community, I'll tell you another story down in Wyalusing, Pennsylvania. The character of a community does change. There are a lot of trucks. There's dust. It's a big operation. It's an industrial operation. But the people who live there, they want this. This is what they're looking for. It's economic growth. It's jobs. There was a woman in a diner, and while I go to diners because I travel a lot. And I said to her, outside were all these trucks, Oklahoma, Texas. I said, what do you think of the gas boom? You know, she said, I love it. I said, why? She said, the people are really nice, they're great tippers, and I'll be able to send my kids to college. And that's a real story. It's true. Now, did the character of her community change? Absolutely. Absolutely. There were a lot of trucks on the road. But just like Steve Osborne's study, the opposition to hydraulic fracturing is a function of your proximity to the well. There's greater opposition to hydraulic fracturing from people who don't live near or will live near a hydraulic fracturing well than those people who do live there. The people who do live with gas under their feet, who do see the economic opportunity of developing what they own, the mineral rights under their feet, they're in favor of hydraulic fracturing. You go to New York City, they're against it. Nobody's ever going to hydraulic fracture in New York City. I'm going to let Tim come up and finish up because Tim is from one of these communities. Tim wants hydraulic fracturing to come to his community.
It's true. We are very excited about the thought and the process of the industry coming to the southern tier. As I stated earlier, with the lay of this play of the Marcellus, central New York and typically anything north of Broome County is not going to be affiliated with this play. We don't mind the NIMBY attitude that has been taken from the other central New York regions. Those local elected officials are acting in their residents' best interest. That's what their residents want. I sit at in my front yard walking my dogs every night, and I literally live with the border of Pennsylvania at the top of the next hill. It's pretty exciting because you're able to see some of the flaring of those pads going off. The reality is we won't see those flarings in New York because of the regulations that are going to be put in place. But we want it. We're looking for that economic development. We're living it. It makes it very difficult for us to literally sit out there and listen and see this industry coming across the border into our towns and realizing it's that close. And I'll put one name to this as well. A gentleman by the name of Mr. Leland Moses. Leland is about 88, 89 years old. Leland Moses. Every time I see him, Tim, when's that drilling coming? I can't afford my taxes anymore. We're just waiting. I said, Mo, we're waiting. Just waiting to see what's going to happen out of Albany. You know, it's what we want. It's proven safe. We see it going on less than 1.5 miles from our properties, from our borders. So give us that opportunity.
Okay, the speakers are very good about respecting the time limits. I want to thank all of them for that. We've got a good chunk of time now to hear from you. Questions, brief comments. Again, I want to emphasize brevity, please, because there's going to be a lot of people I know that want to speak. So give your colleagues in the audience a chance as well, and wait for the microphone to come to you, please. Who's going to go first? There we go. I don't think that's on.
I wonder if the affirmative could respond and kind of make the case for the family that is concerned about their economic well-being, as the other respondents pointed out. What part of your argument would you make to the person that's concerned about sending their kids to college, or that kind of economic argument? Because this audience might be fairly sympathetic to your view, and I wonder if you could answer that.
Environmentalism has gotten tougher and tougher over the years. A lot of the laws we passed, we thought we'd be done with the problems we have with clean water or hazardous waste sites by now. And the public's tired of environmental issues. They want to go back to economic issues. That was true before the recession. And one of the reasons is because they don't think that there are alternatives. They don't think there are solutions. Well, listen, first of all, you cannot trade one problem for another. You cannot trade a problem with paying your mortgage today with a problem that would make your house unmortgageable or uninsurable for generations to come. So you can't jump out of the frying pan and into the fire. Secondly, good American jobs in energy efficiency, good American jobs in renewables, good American jobs in rebuilding communities in a sustainable fashion. Environmentalists like myself, more and more trying to make a pledge to try to follow 3 bottom lines. People think of the bottom line, economics. Environment, social good, and economics. They all got to coalesce. So my first answer is make more HVAC and increase your level of investment in renewable energy. And your second is environmentalists have got to sit side by side at the table with people who are interested in social and economic good, and ditto economic and social with us.
Go ahead quickly, 15 seconds, and then we're going to move on to the next.
Gentlemen, just to give you an idea of what was just explained to you, is that he doesn't care about the economic development of the residents of the Southern Tier and Broome County area.
Who's got the next question? Where's the microphone? Oh, there you go.
My well is part of the Duke study, so I'm pretty familiar with the sampling procedures, and not only the sampling procedures from my well, but also the sampling procedures from how they pick the sites. And thank you. And they didn't cream the sites. They picked them to demonstrate their scientific point. The question I would ask would be, if you were to, there's a classic study in zoning called windfalls or wipeouts. And basically it says that for every windfall, there's a wipeout. And if you were to take out the windfall aspect of this, meaning not worry about the immediate economic benefit, how would you evaluate the potential for drilling?
One of you want to respond?
I'm sure there's a question in there. The question was, could you paraphrase that for me?
Take out the windfall, the immediate economic benefit. Why would you drill?
Why would we drill? So we can live. So we can light this hall. So we can drive here to this meeting. So democracy can work. How would we have this meeting if we couldn't get here?
We're talking about high pressure, hydraulic, horizontal fracture. Why would you do that?
Because that's how you access natural gas.
There are other ways to access natural
In 2005, ExxonMobil declared that they were ceasing all land-based natural gas development in the United States. There were no viable plays left. They were late to the game, obviously. 2 years later, they were buying into horizontal drilling. We go after natural gas. We burn 900 quadrillion BTUs of energy in this nation. 10% of that comes from renewables, 90 quadrillion BTUs. The rest comes from fossil fuels and nuclear. I propose to anybody in this room, where do you come up with 810 quadrillion BTUs?
Well, I've taken a look at the market value of gas versus oil. There's an oversupply of gas right now. There is no, every time there's a strategic impact on oil, there's no impact on gas. You don't need to drill to create more supply right now. Why would you have to?
I'm going to let that be the final comment on that exchange, and we want to go on to get the next person.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Ma'am.
Yes, I've got two questions for the negative side. You neglected to mention the Halliburton loophole. Legislation passed during the Bush-Cheney administration that exempts the gas industry from key provisions of the Federal Clean Water Act put in place to protect human and environmental health. If hydrofracking is so safe and the company's so responsible, why would they ask for those exemptions? Second question. Your statement that the gas is going to be used domestically, I will argue that because there are currently pipelines being constructed that lead to the eastern seaboard where there are liquefaction plants that will turn this gas into a liquid to be tanked overseas to countries willing to pay a premium for gas that they know is too dangerous, and they've exempted fracking in their own countries. They will pay the premium, and the companies, the industry wants the greatest profit from this profit. We will not be getting this domestic gas. I want you to tell me that that gas isn't going to be sold overseas for the greatest profit. So those two questions.
The Halliburton exemption is a clever use of the name Halliburton. We love to demonize that company. But what it is, for those who don't know, is that hydraulically fracturing of gas and oil wells has been going on for over 50 years, since the 1940s. And when the Clean Water rules were created, the Safe Drinking Water Act, hydraulic fracturing wells were exempted from the underground injection program because it was considered at the time in the 1970s that injecting the water into the well to stimulate the flow of gas and oil was only a temporary injection. The underground injection control program was designed to deal with permanent injections. So fracking of hydraulically fracturing of oil and gas wells was never considered to be included in the underground injection control rules, not because of Halliburton. This has happened back in the 1970s, because it was considered it was not a permanent emplacement of a fluid in the subsurface, so it just wasn't considered. Now, what happened was, as the hydraulic fracturing industry developed, they learned that using diesel fuel was a very good fluid. Now they use water. But in the early days of hydraulic fracturing, they would use diesel fuel. And there were a lot of groups, perhaps rightly so, I really am not familiar with the arguments that went on at the time, that said we shouldn't be injecting diesel fuel into the ground. It should be regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And during the Cheney and Bush administration, an agreement was reached that the industry would not be regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act if they stopped using diesel. And so they stopped using diesel, and they weren't regulated under this. That's the Halliburton loophole. I won't tell you any more of the politics about that. than that. I will tell you that the original intent, the reason natural gas and oil was not included was because it was not considered the permanent placement of these fluids underground. And the Safe Drinking Water Control Act, the Underground Injection Control Program, was designed to regulate the permanent placement of fluids. Your second question, in Europe they call it rock gas. And everybody in Europe is scrambling to move from diesel to methane. There's so much methane flooding out of Russia into Europe right now that people want to drive their cars on compressed natural gas. Regarding us exporting natural gas, I don't know that I'm against it. We were hit back to back in 2005 with two devastating hurricanes, Katrina and Rita, and it completely wiped out 7 refineries and all of our Gulf oil and gas production. And we barely saw a blimp at the pump, barely a blimp, because energy independence is not being able to supply all of your own energy. What we need is energy security. And what happened was our trading partners made up for all the lost methane and all the lost oil. And we barely saw a blip at the pump. So we should export some of our bountiful natural gas to other countries. We should be active in the global trading of fuel so that when our next hurricane hits, we just got hit on the coast, we have trading partners that can help supply us. And we don't see the devastating price increases.
Yeah, please. Let me give a different take on those topics. The classic hydraulic fracturing, as I mentioned, to stimulate conventional gas and oil wells, used relatively small volumes of water, originally 10,000 gallons, maybe up to 50,000 gallons. When we went after shale gas, just in the last, mostly in the last 3-5 years, all in the last 10 years, new phenomenon, that got bumped up to 5 million gallons. Now the difference there isn't simply a matter of how much water use. When you put 20,000 gallons into a conventional dome-like formation, the water stays down there, it doesn't come back up. You put 5 million into a shale that has no porosity in it, and a lot of it comes back up. 1 million gallons in the first few weeks, several more million gallons over the next few years. So that's a big difference. The Halliburton exception, which was passed in 2005, is quite broad in exempting this technology from all sorts of environmental regulation. I don't think that got anywhere near the attention it should have at the time, and clearly that should be reversed. You know, industry right now is not making money on shale gas. They simply are not. Price right now is a little over $3 per 1,000 cubic feet. Depending on who you want to listen to, the price of gas has to be between $4.50 if you believe Chesapeake Gas, or up to $7 if you believe the International Energy Administration, or up to $9 if you believe Art Berman, for them to make a profit back on this. So clearly they want to jack the price up. How do you do that? Price here is about $3.16 today per 1,000 cubic feet. In Europe, it's around $9 or $10. In China, it's around 12 or 13. In Japan, it's 15 at the moment. So you export it, right? That does two things. It drives the price up here, so an industry starts to make an economic return. I think it's a terrible idea. And the reason I think it's a terrible idea is because of the greenhouse consequences, which I'm very worried about. We already emit methane when we move gas through pipelines and when we drill wells, et cetera. When you compress it, you lose more to the atmosphere. And the tankers lose it as a safety feature. They vent all the way over. So there are big methane gas leakages associated with exporting gas. Same idea with using gas as a transportation fuel. Really bad idea. When you refuel vehicles and when you store methane on a vehicle, you vent gas, making the greenhouse gases even worse. You know, we should be going to electrification of the transportation system. We should just be going into the 21st century with our eyes open.
Everyone on the stage tonight has admitted that the science is still evolving and is not quite settled yet in terms of the environmental effects and the public health effects of fracking. However, we've seen that big industry, including fossil fuels and tobacco, continue to challenge the science even when it's completely settled and unequivocal. So my question is to the nay side. Do you think that if the science became settled and 98% of the people who study this said that it has detrimental environmental and public health effects, do you think the industry would admit it and give in? And would you personally change your mind if the science came back settled, relatively settled at 98%? Would you personally change your mind about fracking?
Well, the beauty of science is that it's never settled. Science is not designed to be settled. It's not designed to be settled. We can reach agreement, okay? I have one, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No, I mean, I didn't mean that tongue-in-cheek. I mean, the rules, the laws of science dictate that we adjust our paradigms when new evidence appears. And absolutely, if new evidence appeared that convinced me that there was greater threat to the environment and to the human health from hydraulic fracturing, I would absolutely change my mind. I'm an independent consultant. I just operate on the facts that are in front of me. So, I heard everybody laugh, and, when I said science that's the beauty of science. It is the beauty of science. Opinions that we had 150 years ago about how the Earth worked are radically different, luckily. Right? We knew nothing about plate tectonics 150 years ago, and now that dictates everything how we do with the Earth, okay? So, yes, I'm absolutely ready to change my mind as soon as it's in front of me. Will the oil companies change their mind? I don't know, honestly. They operate under market forces, and they rarely operate at a loss. So I can't understand my opponent's opinion that they're losing $5 per 1,000 cubic feet of gas if they can only sell it for $2 and it's costing them $7 to get it. We're all in business in some sort. Nobody stays in business at a loss.
Do you want to add, and then do you want to jump in on that? Yes. Okay. He wants to add something, and then we'll check.
And again, obviously, having no background in science, I'm not going to even begin to approach the discussion of the science end of it. Personally, if it were presented to me and it was unequivocally showing a hazardous situation to personally and environmentally to the residents of our area, absolutely, I would be changing my mind. So yes.
The interesting thing about the hypothetical in your question is that it says, if we get to a stage where we know and we understand. Now, Mr. Hinchey mentioned the Centers for Disease Control earlier. I'm going to read you a quote. I love to read quotes, and I wish I had more time. I got more quotes. A quote from a gentleman named Christopher Portier, who is the director of the National Center for Environmental Health at the Centers for Disease Control. And he said in January, "We need more research for us to understand the public health impacts of these new gas drilling technologies." Now, it's not really a far extension to say that he's saying we don't understand the impacts. This is why I call hydrofracking, and my colleague, Dr. Howarth as well, an uncontrolled experiment on the communities where it's being done. So yes, of course, it's easy to take the pledge if all the science were one way or the other, we'd all agree with the science. The companies wouldn't, because they've got huge investments and it's in their interest to maintain their investment. They'll even tell you my shareholders require me to do so, even if it is not moral and not good for the people in these communities. If the law allows me to do it, or if I can slide by all those agencies that have cut their regulatory staff by 30%. There are 13 inspectors in New York State right now for oil and gas. 13. Big state. They're planning 48,000 more wells. So just remember this. If the science were all one way or the other, fine. But we are fracking without knowing the impact on people's health. And that is not me talking. That is not some individual talking. That is the head of the Center for Environmental Health of the United States.
Is it on? Oh, yeah, okay. You have to find that exact spot. I first wanted to say something about trying to draw a parallel between the water used for Chobani or New York City. That water, that wastewater can be, is it still on? That water, wastewater can be recycled at municipal recycling plants, water treatment plants, and then be put back into the hydrologic cycle, whereas fracking water can't. And X amount stays down there and X amount comes back up. The industry tries to recycle that into fracking the next well. At some point, it becomes too toxic to use for even that, and then it goes to deep injection wells, never to be seen again. It does not go back into the hydrologic cycle. It can't. As they frack more and more wells, that's going to take out more and more and more fresh water out of the hydrologic cycle. The other thing I want to bring up is maybe one of you can address the problem with using sand for hydrofracking. Sand is what props open the fractures once they're made that allows the natural gas to seep out from there. What they want to use, the figure that I've heard, and I will be corrected if anybody wants to, but was 5 million pounds per well frack, okay? 5 million pounds of sand. That means somewhere people are digging that sand out. When you do that, you get nice little round pebbles of sand, but you also get enormous amounts of silica dust. Silica dust is not round and nice. It's jagged and sharp and pointed and very small. It gets in people's lungs. It gets in the workers' lungs, the miners' lungs, the people who live in the area's lungs, if any of it comes out of the truck when it's being hauled, and also the people, the workers and the people in the community where the fracking goes on. So this can cause either great lung damage through silicosis or possibly even fatal lung disease. Could someone please address that? Thank you.
Anybody want to discuss sand?
I can.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the quantity of sand used, but you're correct that a lot of the sand is extremely fine particle. And in fact, a lot of it is purposefully very, very fine particle because they're trying to get the sand into the fissures they're making to keep them open. Public health aspects with that are not terribly well studied, but you're correct. It causes serious lung disease issues. The overall effects, I'm told, I'm not a public health expert, but my friends who are tell me that the effects are pretty much the same as for asbestos. It's a similar size particle. The consequences are about the same. And there's a lot of this stuff being moved around in communities. You can go down to the southern tier right now and see big piles of it sitting there. So it's an issue in New York already.
Yeah. The perils of silicosis have been known for a long time. OSHA regulates it. Workers are protected by OSHA. Silicosis and silica concentrations are regularly monitored in the air. You are right. Mining of quartz sand does generate silica dust. Regarding your comment that the water that leaks out of the aqueduct to New York City is returned to the hydrologic cycle, it's not. At 32 million gallons is lost. That's an injection. And your comment that the Chobani water is returned is actually not correct either. They have on their Susquehanna River Basin permit application a net extraction of 1.2 million gallons and a discharge of 551,000 gallons per day. So there's a net loss of about 200. They have another factor in there. It's 173. I didn't unexplain it, but at the bottom it said actual net consumptive use was 280,000 gallons per day. That's lost to, they're boiling and they have steam and so forth, and so the consumptive use of water is not new to the natural gas industry. And even though it sounds a lot, it's a big number, 5 million gallons in the scheme of the hydrologic cycle of New York, it's not a very large amount of water.
Steam and evaporated water go back into the hydrologic cycle.
That's true. But I heard in ooh and ah that 5 or 6 million gallons is a lot of water. Does anybody know how much precipitation we receive a year in central New York?
Times 40,000
Yeah. Do you know how much? If I've done the calculations, and if we drilled all of the New York wells in 1 year and simply withdrew the water from Cuca Lake, okay, we would use 0.64% of the precipitation that just fell on Cuca Lake, not that came from the watershed, just the water that fell right on the lake. Okay, it's a very small amount.
We have a question or a comment down here.
I just have a general comment. New York State can complete the writing the strict regulations and have it disclosed to the public, and we can use hydrofracking as a backup. But in the meantime, I don't understand why we cannot use wind power, for example, which has a 17 to 20 to 1 ratio of energy return on investment, while natural gas from hydrofracking has about a 10 to 12 to 1 EROI ratio. We can install and use wind power, for example, for renewable energies in the next 5 to 15 years. And if that ends up not being enough power to host enough energy requirements for New York State, by the time that we can go back to using hydrofracking as a feasible opportunity, the cost of natural gas will already be higher, which will result in a higher EROI. That's just a general statement. Thank you.
Comment. I want to move to our last question. You want to be super quick on that, and then we're going to get. We have time for one last question.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with you totally. But there are, in fact, plans that they're looking at exactly how to make New York, as with the rest of the country, fossil fuel free. And the plans that I've seen say that we could get enough wind primarily, some solar, some tidal, some hydro, together with use of a smart grid and energy efficiency to not need any fossil fuels, say in 30 years out from now.
And quickly, Ed, and then
I
the last question.
I agree with Dr. Howarth that all those measures should be taken, and they will go a long way to reducing our energy use and our fossil fuel use. The problem with wind is a problem of scale. The average wind turbine is 1.5 megawatts, and it produces that when the wind's turning 12 miles per hour. There's a thing called a capacity factor with a windmill, and it's about 20%. The industry will tell you it's 25. That means if you put in a 1.5 megawatt wind turbine, you'll get about 20% of that, okay? I calculated for the coldest day of the year in 2011 how much energy National Grid used, 3.2 billion cubic feet of natural gas, okay? It was January 24th, 2011, the coldest day on record in the Northeast. National Grid, as you heard, gas is used to heat. If the wind wasn't blowing because the cold pressure front had settled in, we have nine windmill plants in New York State. None of them made any power that night. And we burned 3.2 billion cubic feet of natural gas. If we had to replace that natural gas with wind, we would have had to have installed 2,500 1.5 megawatt wind turbines, and they would have had to put into a storage facility, which doesn't exist yet, the amount of energy that would have to be dissipated over that 24-hour period. So the problem with windmilling, with winds, is scale. I'm all for wind, and we should build them. I love seeing the Fenner wind farm. But in terms of how much energy we use, the technology, one, for generating it, and two, for storing it, just isn't where it needs to be.
Well, this is going to be the last question. The question needs to be super quick, and the response needs to be super quick. So go ahead.
I thought it was on. Just an observation. I was kind of surprised considering
Super quick.
Bob Howarth's his big thing is the carbon footprint, and there has been no address by this team. I'm just making that comment. I don't know if you want a last shot at that or something. But the other thing is, if you're not concerned about the pollution issues, I don't understand why don't we simply rescind the so-called Halliburton loopholes and then the industry proceed? Would you be happy with that in the town of Binghamton? Would you be willing to say, well, yeah, we'll rescind those loopholes first, even if we have to do it essentially on a state regulation basis, and say we'll hold off on it until that's in place?
Okay, real quick on the whole greenhouse emissions, that a study has just been recently released that shows that from 2005 to 2010, the greenhouse emissions problem has come down. Carbon monoxides have been reduced to its lowest levels in years. Methane levels are up. The offset between the carbon monoxides and the methane is, in fact, that the greenhouse emissions have come down. So, that is attributable to the use of natural gas. So I just wanted to put that on the table, that natural gas is a benefit toward the greenhouse emissions gas situation. But quickly again, ask me the question that you don't need the mic, just go ahead and ask me.
No.
Oh, go ahead.
I wouldn't want to rescind what people call, I wouldn't want companies hydraulically fracturing with diesel fuel. No.
Quick summary on the methane. The paper we put out came out just 19 months ago. It's very controversial. There have been about 20 follow-up papers since then. About a third of them agree with us, about a third don't, and the others are in between. I still stand by what we've done. There's new science coming along all the time, which I think shows our estimates to be very conservative. But the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency says that 17% of all of the methane entering the atmosphere of the United States comes from the natural gas industry. Those aren't my data, they're EPA's. I think they're way too low. So natural gas is the major source, according to the U.S. EPA, in this country. It's probably, I'd say, more like 25%. So it's a big issue.
Okay, we're going to move to concluding statements now, and we will start with the affirmative. The affirmative goes first, and then the negative will have the last word. Paul Gillet, you're going to speak for your team.
I want to thank you all. I want to thank my debate partner, moderator, folks debating on the negative side. I also want to thank Mr. Hinchey for a couple of things that he said that I think make my closing statements easier. He talked about fracking industrializing the landscape. He talked about benzene pollution being real. He talked about issues with silicosis being real. And by the way, the OSHA folks agree with him on that. You can just Google up the study that they did this summer about how fracking workers suffer from silicosis, and you'll see that that's the case. And one thing that Mr. Whitesell said that I think I need to take issue with is that, the folks who are passing the bans and the moratoria are not, implicated by this. It's easy for them. They're trying to cost the people who want it. They're downwind of that benzene. They're downwind of the air pollution that we've acknowledged is coming up in Texas. We've acknowledged is coming up in Colorado and Wyoming. We are downwind of that, and that gives us a stake in this issue. It gives us a dog in this hunt. I want to tell you about the issue of how long the benefits will last. There's studies out of Cornell, studies out of West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy that say that over time, drilling communities lag behind other communities in personal income, employment growth, economic diversity, educational attainment, and ability to attract investment. That's the meaning of boom bust, folks. This is a false benefit. There are going to be winners and losers initially. Remember that 1% in Bradford County? We're all going to be losers eventually. You have to ignore so much to want to hydrofrack. You have to ignore so many studies. You have to ignore so many facts to come down on the side of hydrofracking. And I know that you will not come down on the side of hydrofracking. You will accept the proposal because you understand that hydrofracking does more harm than good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, again for having us here tonight. In my closing remarks, I would like to say that OSHA did study silica exposure. Drillers are exposed to higher levels of silica, but there has not been a case of silicosis. Okay. In summary, I want you to consider the following. You've heard a lot of exaggerated claims. They've been given to you out of context. These claims have been evaluated by the EPA. An evaluation is continuing. The DEC, the Canadian Ministry for the Environment, the International Energy Agency, and the European Union. Their studies are reported, are published. You can go find them. and they have all reached the same conclusion. There are risks associated with hydraulic fracturing. However, they also reached the same conclusion, that the risk is manageable. These studies by qualified environmental organizations show that there is no systemic environmental threat from hydraulic fracturing. Over 100,000 wells have been drilled, and people are not dropping over dead. People are not getting sick. If we do not move forward with natural gas development and continue to move away from coal, there will be confirmed continued harm. People will continue to die prematurely from respiratory illness. Landowners will continue to lose access to the mineral wealth beneath their feet. We know we can no longer afford the luxuries of the past. We must move to on-demand natural gas backup generation to supplement the inconsistent production and lack of storage capacity in our expanding renewable energy portfolio. Hydraulic fracturing does more good than harm. Thank you.
Well, just in closing, I want to thank the panelists for a very substantive and spirited debate. I also want to thank them for being mindful of the time. I want to thank all of you for attending and contributing, and I have a couple reminders and invitations, but first I think we should give the debaters and ourselves a round of applause. Before I remind you about the closing ballot, there's a couple things I have to say about that. I want to say a few words about the next debates, which will pick up again in the next calendar year. We have a tentative plan to host a debate on campaign finance and campaign spending, which may actually be in New York City, and if that's the case, it will be a live stream event for us up here. But I also want to encourage you to get in touch with me with ideas for other debate topics that we might do in the near future.